All right, we are now at the very beginning of this webinar. For today's agenda, 1, property coverage review. 2, risk management and property maintenance. 3, property claims case study. And 4, and finally, discussion with questions and answers. And now I will turn the presentation over to our wonderful presenters. Take it away, guys.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us again this month. This is Paul Stevens with Church Insurance. I'm going to be on the call today with my colleague Joseph Funk, who is the Director of Claims. Last month, you may recall that we outlined our summer syllabus for Property and Casualty 101, and today we will start with a property coverage review and ultimately some risk management tips and a property case study from a claims perspective. So I hope it's helpful. And Jermaine, next slide, please. Okay, so some of the basics when we get into property coverage, we start with what are called perils. Perils, simply stated, would be all the bad things that can happen to property. You see on your page some of the basic perils that are listed. These are called basic and extended perils. Things like fire, lightning, wind and hail, vandalism, water, which is limited generally, building damage, things like that. Specific to the Church Insurance Company policy, you should know that we provide coverage on what's called a special perils basis. And what a special peril basis means is that unless the peril is specifically excluded, there is coverage in the policy. So that would lead you to obviously some questions about, well, what are some of the specific exclusions? And I think we'll go ahead and change the page, Jermaine, and lead to that conversation. Okay, again, we'll talk about exclusions in a bit here. The components of property coverage starts with property limits, and when we say property limits, we're generally talking about the actual coverage limit for a building or buildings and for the contents within those buildings. Associated with those coverages are deductibles, and there can be various deductibles depending on your location and the coverage template that you may have selected. So, for example, the all other property deductible is what you would associate with things like fire, vandalism, and it's stated in a dollars basis. Generally, we see folks that'll have $1,000 deductible, but there are folks that'll have that significantly higher for a savings. You will also see deductibles stated in a percentage basis for things like flood, crime, which is employee theft and embezzlement, earthquake, if you've selected that coverage, hurricane, if you're coastal, wind and hail in certain areas. So you can see various deductibles either in a dollar stated basis or a percentage stated basis. Within the policy are what are called extensions of coverage, and we're again talking about property, halls and walls, buildings, things we can touch and feel and measure. Some of the big extensions of coverage would be ordinance of law. Think of it as codes coverage. The property is insured to replacement cost. It means that we are going to replace the building the way it is. If, however, the building is in an area where the codes have changed, which are basically everywhere, you will run into codes issues. And since the policy is designed to replace the building, you need some additional coverage for codes, and that is called ordinance of law, and you find that in the extensions of coverage. Some other things that are within our extensions speak directly to some of the exclusions. So one of the big ones that is very unique for us and for you is that flood coverage is automatically included. For every policy we write, there's $1 million flood limit per policy. So jumping over to exclusions real quick, and then we'll dig down into fine arts and equipment breakdown and a malicious attack in some future slides. But some of the typical exclusions, you heard me say earlier, you're covered unless something's specifically excluded because we're on a special basis. What are some of the exclusions? Well, some of the exclusions that you need to be aware of is, one, wear and tear. Property policy is not designed as a maintenance policy. It's designed to indemnify you for a sudden loss, accidental loss. Wear and tear, typical maintenance things are not typically covered. You know that wear and tear can confuse a claim. For example, if the roof is 50 years old when the hailstorm hits and the adjuster gets on the roof and finds it hard to determine what caused the damage, what the value of the roof was, again, wear and tear can confuse things a bit. Other exclusions would be war, any kind of political war, declaration of war. Surface water, which is flood, and you heard me say we basically plug that gap with an extension of coverage where we give you the flood back. Earthquake is a typical exclusion unless you've purchased it separately. So with that, we're going to do a little drill down into some of the other areas. Jermaine, you can hit the slide, please. One of the things we need to talk about before we move forward is how do you come up with a value for a building? We have big, beautiful buildings. We have buildings of all shapes, sizes, eras, different kinds of construction. What is important is a updated and current property valuation. So again, as I mentioned, replacement cost is a cost of repairing or replacing damaged property with new material of similar kind and quality. So it's very important that when a claim happens, especially if it's a total claim, that you have the right amount of coverage on your policy. To assure that you do, the company provides free building appraisal estimates, which we complete every 7 to 10 years. We are currently in a cycle right now where we're about halfway through. We should complete this in about the next 18 months. It's a big task. There's 18,000 insured buildings in the system, and we look at every one of them. The good news about it is we have a long history of appraisals for almost every building in the system that have been completed over the years by independent appraisers. So we have things like plats, and a plat is basically a overview from the sky of the building looking down, so think of it as a schematic. We have that in file, and we also now, with technology, are able to pull that up at our desktop with Google Earth and look for anything that's changed in that building. Perhaps something has been added to that building since the last time we measured it. Obviously, Google Earth cuts the cost quite a bit. We no longer really need to engage outside appraisers. We do most of it ourselves in-house. And like I said, we're about halfway done through our new cycle of appraisals. And as those numbers become available, they get implemented into the renewal. And again, the key there is to make sure that everyone has enough coverage if the worst things happen. Pipe organs and stained glass are included in the value of the building. And the reasoning of that is they're permanently attached to the building. So a pipe organ is it's built-in part of the building. So it's important that we account for pipe organs and add them to the replacement cost of the building. We have pipe organs in the system that are well into the 7 figures, and if you miss one, you've missed a lot from an insurance perspective. So it's super important that we get that information. We constantly are looking for that and asking questions about that, whether you still have the pipe organ, you've received a new pipe organ, the pipe organ has changed, anything like that. Similarly, stained glass windows. We have a lot of stained glass in the Episcopal system. We have it from basic values, things I would consider art glass or colored glass, just kind of basic, all the way up to Lafarge and Tiffany windows that are in some cases worth more than the building. Stained glass is something that requires some outside expertise. It's outside of my expertise, outside of church insurance expertise to actually value the stained glass. For cases of stained glass, we typically will ask you what you have on file as far as the value of the stained glass. And generally, if you've ever had any work done on your windows and you're working with a fine arts studio or stained glass studio, they can give you a very good understanding or estimate of the value to replace that stained glass. A lot of folks will say to me, it's irreplaceable, and I agree with them to a certain extent. we do replace Tiffany windows. I've had an example here in Tennessee where a Tiffany window blew out of a church into a million pieces. We hired a preeminent expert in the field who put the stained glass back together in their studio, and it was reinstalled in the church, and the church was very, very happy with it. But the one thing to remember, as we stood back and looked at it, I said to the fine artist, they've gotten their Tiffany back. And he said, well, not quite. It's half Tiffany and it's half Feminella. And his point was well taken. It looks great. It looks the same to layman, but Tiffany is no longer with us. So when you're replacing these things, it's still very expensive, but there is some intrinsic value that is lost. But want everybody to be aware that if you have fine stained glass pipe organs, we do have expertise in bringing them back with similar kind and quality. There's an inflation guard adjustment that is applied annually to your property limits. It's simply set up to keep up with social inflation, which is the cost year by year of which insurance claims escalate. So typically we will increase the value of the building somewhere between 1 to 3% per year. Same with the contents. Again, it does us no good to appraise a building every 7 to 10 years and then not keep up with the inflation annually. So we do that, and you see that reflected at renewal. Contents valuation, just to add a little bit here, contents are the property within the church, and it's really determined by the church. So this is something that a church can certainly increase, decrease at their how they feel comfortable. We can give you some guidelines as far as, here's a rule of thumb. If a building is $1 million in value, you want at least 10% of that value to be in contents, and there's some other rules of thumb around that. But generally, it's up to the church to determine that the contents value would make them whole. One thing I caution churches is make sure you're not insuring overvalue, because you don't want to pay for things that you don't have, and conversely, you want to make sure you're not undervaluing contents. And Jermaine, we'll go ahead and move forward there. Fine arts coverage. So this is one of the 3 areas I wanted to drill down a little bit. This is unique for church insurance and for all of our participants. So church insurance automatically provides $1 million of unscheduled fine arts coverage for every policy we write. That's the basic. There's no separate charge for it. It's built into the policy. Our experience through the years has been that every Episcopal church has some sort of fine art, sometimes whether they know it or not. And we've had experiences where, for example, a high-valued tapestry, unbeknownst to the church, damaged in a fire, church didn't think it was really worth anything, ended up being worth 7 figures. So one of the ways that we want to provide anybody from being surprised in a bad way is to make sure we account for what we feel is out there, which is a basic limit of coverage of unscheduled fine arts of $1 million. What is unscheduled fine arts? Unscheduled fine arts means you don't have to tell us you have it. You don't need to know what its value is. You don't even need to know that it is a fine art. But at the time of the claim, if it's determined to be a fine art, we're going to have this $1 million limit available to draw from. This is a little different than what you may know about maybe in the homeowner's world, where you schedule things. So you may schedule a diamond ring specifically on a policy and say, hey, this diamond ring is worth $5,000. In the event of a loss, I would like $5,000. And you basically settle the claim before it happens. We do have the ability to schedule fine arts as requested. So if you're in a situation where you know you have more than $1 million in fine arts, first step would be to engage an expert, a fine arts appraiser, to come in and give you a baseline of what value you actually have. You could bring that back to church insurance, and we could quote it as a schedule for you, provide pricing associated with that limit. That happens from time to time. And sometimes churches will just do the due diligence to determine their level of exposure and then decide not to buy the extra coverage in any event. Either way is fine with us. Just want you to know everybody has $1 million of fine arts coverage built in. what are fine arts? It includes but not limited to paintings, icons, sculpture, wood, carvings, tapestry. You can see the list there. So when I'm speaking to vestries, the way I say it is it's things you're not going to find inside of the catalog, the church catalog. These are unique items. They're ornate. For more information about fine arts, you can always reach out to us and we can go over the policy form with you, but this gives you a pretty good idea of what's included. Fine arts appraisals, again, are obtained by the church. It's outside of our expertise. We know about buildings and footprints of buildings and how to value a building, but we do not have any expertise as far as the values of fine arts. Similar, with pipe organs, while we can determine a value, we also have to ask a lot of questions about that as well. Next slide, please. Second area I wanted to drill down to is a coverage that's in the policy. Every policy that we issue has this coverage. This is called equipment breakdown coverage. And what equipment breakdown coverage does is it plugs a gap that's left by the policy. And for accidental explosion, mechanical breakdown, and electrical injury to heating, ventilation, electrical, and electronic objects. Covers everything from steam boilers to telephone systems. When you think about this, this is what you may hear us refer to as steam boiler coverage, things like that. It did start out years ago, 100 years ago, as boiler coverage. Buildings were heated by a steam boiler. The steam boiler was well maintained, but for some reason suddenly and accidentally would explode. The property policy excluded it, so the equipment breakdown coverage was born. Hartford steam boiler was one of the first. Travelers steam boilers involved as well. We actually use Traveler steam boilers to provide expertise in this area. So it expanded over the years because nowadays, if you're down in my neck of the woods in the southeast, for example, we don't see a lot of boilers down here. It's HVAC. The coverage has been expanded, as it shows you on the screen, to cover things like sudden and accidental arcing. The key to this, well maintained, it's not neglect, it's not wear and tear, it's a sudden and accidental loss, whether it's a boiler loss or a phone system loss. That summarizes equipment breakdown coverage. It's an important aspect of your coverage and, again, plugs a gap that's left by the conventional property insurance policy. Next slide, please. Malicious attack. So this is new. You folks, we added this to every insured about a year and a half ago, and it's kind of an unfortunate situation. It's a reflection of the times. So active shooter is at the top of everyone's mind, and we were always looking for a way that we could plug some of the holes that might be in the policy if that were to occur. So first thing we need to do is kind of define malicious attack. Malicious attack involves the use of a vehicle, explosive device, any handheld weapon intended to harm another person or group of persons. It's carried out or attempted by any person or group of persons acting alone or on behalf or in connection with any organization, results in bodily injury or any person or physical loss or damage, destruction to tangible property, i.e. buildings, contents. So active shooter, car bomb, any bad thing you could think of would generally fall under this malicious attack type of definition. I think people are pretty clear on what we're trying to address here. And with that, we'll move to the next slide and talk about some of the coverage aspects. Okay. So again, it's a national program. It's automatically included in your package policy. And actually, the correct way to say that is if you have a package policy with you, we will issue you a certificate for malicious attack. It's actually a standalone placement through Lloyd's of London. And here's the highlights of the coverage. It provides $10 million per occurrence for physical loss, physical damage, or business interruption to your building. There's an interesting aspect to it in that it gives you civil authority coverage. So, for example, Bad thing happens at the church. Local law enforcement has to use a tank to bust through the wall, destroys parts of the building. Typical property policy would exclude that act of civil authority. The malicious attack coverage kicks in and fills that gap. Another interesting aspect of it, it again goes to business interruption. The attack does not necessarily have to happen at your location. The business interruption coverage extends to locations in your area. So the federal building down the street is attacked. The civil authorities block off all the streets for 2 weeks. There's no revenue being derived from the school, for example. You lose some income. Even though it didn't happen at your facility, the policy would pay toward that business interruption. So that's unique in that it's covering an event that didn't necessarily impact you directly, but indirectly impacted you. So it's an important aspect. Another great part, to the right side of the screen, you see there's a $250,000 limit which provides crisis management and public relations. So after the attack, how do we handle public relations? How do we make people feel safe again? There's counseling that's built in that up to $250,000. How do we get people help who lived through this? The loved ones, the employees, the volunteers. What about additional security expenses that now we need because we found a weakness in our old system? So malicious attack at a high level. Again, this is unique. I have started to see it in the church marketplace, but not to these levels. Jermaine, next slide, please. Risk management and property maintenance. So let's go ahead and there we go. So risk management services that are provided, you're all aware of Safeguarding God's Children. It's a current program. It's available via Presidian, but it generally speaks to liability. The Episcopal Safety Program, ESP, speaks more directly to property, but also to liability. And what it is, it's our proactive approach to making churches a safer place to worship by focusing on inexpensive changes that improve safety. So with your request, we will send a rep out to your church. We will walk through the church plant, all the buildings. We will run you through a 25-page worksheet that we will complete, and we'll look at everything from dealing with people, handling of monies, autos, playgrounds, buildings, roofs, safeguarding God's children, everything under the sun that's a risk management concern for you and for us. It's free of charge. Again, you can access that just by reaching us at the service center, and they will hook you up with your appropriate vice president of the region who will come out and perform this for you. At the end of that, you will receive a letter from the company that will outline any recommendations that we see while we're on the ground. And again, just to reiterate, risk management with regard to steam boilers or things like that, any kind of equipment breakdown issues, are provided by Travelers, and they provide the actual annual inspections and look for surge protection opportunities, and another great risk management service provided free of charge from church insurance. Next slide, please. Risk management and property maintenance. This kind of goes back, part of this gets into what we were talking about earlier with regard to wear and tear, and then the rest of it really is more proactive in terms of preventing or reducing a loss. So when you talk about property maintenance, some of the most important things to you and to us are roofs and the structural integrity of the building. We don't want to be in a situation where we're putting anyone at risk because of a structural problem. We also want to make sure these buildings are weather tight with regard to roofs, foundations. If those roofs are in bad shape, they're leaking water, it can lead to other problems and actually some health concerns through mold. So again, something we focus on a lot, and we work closely with the church when we see issues to quickly resolve those and protect people and property. Fire prevention, we give the basis and basics with that. A lot of you folks do a better job of this by just having the fire chief coming through annually. They are really the experts and see things that we won't necessarily always see or know with regard to local codes and things like that and requirements. But fire prevention can be also things as simple as, do we have a policy on candles? Do we have a policy of smoking away from the building? Do we have a policy of not storing flammables in our boiler room? I've walked into boiler rooms and found lawnmowers and cans of gas sitting right next to boilers. So you will see these things if you look sometimes, and you want to just address it right away. And a little bit can go a long way with regard to fire prevention. Kitchen safety. This can be, generally it's the food itself. We want to make sure we're not getting folks sick and, with the spaghetti dinner that we serve or the pancakes that we serve. It can also have to do with things like knives. Are they stored correctly out of the way so nobody's getting hurt? It can get into lifting hazards. Do we make sure that we don't have things on a high shelf that are heavy that someone's going to get up and try to bring down, and it's going to overwhelm them and potentially harm or hurt them? Risk management with regard to classrooms and playground safety. Again, anything to do with children, we are laser focused. Classrooms, what we're looking for is age-appropriate furniture. We're looking at window shades, making sure that the cords don't represent any kind of choking hazard. Playground safety, we're looking to make sure that the equipment is appropriate, commercial-grade equipment, it's spaced properly, and most importantly, that the surface below the equipment is appropriate. And generally, that calls for some sort of surface 4 to 6 inches deep. Can be as simple as wood chunks and wood chips, sand. I've seen it all the way up to rubber pellets, which are professional installation. But any kind of surface is better than no surface. And especially we want to make sure there's no concrete, stumps, anything that would be a hazard to a child who's having a good time on the gym set or on the swing set. We also provide seasonal checklists, disaster preparation work. You folks who were with us last month, you heard us talk about the Church Insurance Risk Management Basic ebook. If you don't already have a copy of that, I encourage you to go to churchinsuranceragency.org, download a free copy of it. It's a PDF, it's searchable, it's very deep, and you will find information about everything that we talk about throughout the summer with regard to property and casualty. Jermaine, next slide, please. All right, and now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and friend, Joe Bunk. Joe is the Director of Property Claims, and he's going to run you through a real-life claims case study, something that has actually happened that we hope will be helpful to you in understanding our claim process and how we look to resolve and make churches whole after a loss. Joe, it's off to you.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Paul said, my name is Joe Bunk, Director of Property Claims. I lead a team of 5 to service our customers across the country. We have 2 here in the Vermont office, and we're developing more of a field presence. We actually have 3 remote adjusters, so that way we can get out when we to see the losses and to meet our customers. We especially try to get out when we do get out when there's the larger catastrophe type events like the hurricanes and that sort of thing. Next slide, Jermaine. The goal of our claim department is to get you back in a pre-loss condition as quickly and efficiently as possible. There's 3 things that we do when a claim comes in. We investigate, we evaluate, and we finalize. And we try to do that as quickly as we can because we understand that this is a disruption. There's a lot of uncertainty when a claim occurs, especially the larger claims, and we'll get to that in a moment. But if there is a serious claim, we try to make an advance payment. Essentially, you're borrowing against the ultimate cost of the claim. But that takes out a lot of the uncertainty to help ease the severity of the situation. It helps take away the emotional part of the claim. There is coverage in the policy for extra expense. That's evaluated as part of the loss. And any way that we can evaluate and find coverage in a claim, we do that. That's what our claims team does. There's times when we can resolve a claim very quickly. If it's a smaller routine claim, we try to basically resolve it. I'm hopefully someday we'll be able to resolve the claims. We say 30 days. I'd like to see us drive that number down. I like us to get to the point where sometimes we can have one conversation and gather enough information where we can close a claim down. And recently we partnered with a vendor management company called Alacrity, and that's been really helping us close claims faster, because we're working with a lot of vendors who understand the insurance contract, which basically puts you back as you were, which is a restoration process versus a replacement process. And that's something to think about. If you do suffer a loss, say it's a smaller loss and you're deciding to go out there and solicit some bids for the repair work. The instructions that you should be providing is the repair bids, repair estimates need to reflect the replacement of the material that's already there. You see this a lot of times in roofing, where a roofer will submit an estimate or provide an estimate based on what they need to do in order to do the roof repair or replacement. Often that's addressed in the claim. It's often because of a code question or a code requirement, but that's a separate coverage. So we have to start with what's there, evaluate that coverage. And then if we see that something needs to be added because of a new code requirement, we address that under a separate coverage. So when we can do that separation faster, it does speed up the time it takes to resolve the claim. We can go on to the next slide, Jermaine. Here we have a property claim case study. Very nice church, suffered a severe fire loss, actually a total fire loss. This was a situation where the fire was caused by the negligence of a plumber. I spoke how we do the investigation and evaluation. Well, as Paul described, we sometimes need additional experts. We need evaluation experts to help us put together the value of the building. We also use experts to help us put together the value of the contents. And my team has a lot of experience in resolving property claims and resolving complex property claims. So we use a lot of innovative ideas. In this particular claim, we solicited and eventually received a lot of photo documentation from all the a lot of the community members, church members had their weddings there, or their children had their weddings there. So we were able to view these photos and actually gather up what the contents claim was, because you can see from the photo the severity of the damage. And the investigators that we brought in helped us prove that there was someone else that was responsible for this loss. And even on smaller claims, we're trying to recover whenever we can from the party that may have caused the loss. So if you do have a situation where something does happen, a piece of equipment fails and causes a water loss, a pipe, a fitting, anything, we need that, we'll call it evidence, to be saved and preserved, because oftentimes we can pursue another claim against a manufacturer, installer, company, someone else that is involved and ultimately was the reason why the loss occurred. And that's where you see the last part of the slide says legal subrogation attorney. At the onset of this claim, we brought in a subrogation attorney to assist us, another one of the expertise that we talk about, to help us take the right steps. Because ultimately, if we can recover at least a portion of what was paid out in this claim, it helps us all, because it helps to keep rates lower, that sort of thing. Plus, it helps to, sometimes when we pursue claims, it helps to make things safer products, that sort of things. Next slide, please. We're at the question and answer part.
Yes, we are, and we do have some questions.
Excellent.
All right, I want to remind everyone that to submit a question, please go to the questions window of the GoToWebinar control panel, type them in, and we will take them in the order that they are received. And if you give me just a second, I am going through the questions now. You can also ask a question verbally by using the raised hand icon, and that is in the audio window of the GoToWebinar control panel also. And what will happen is you will click that. It will let me know that you would like to ask a live question. I will then unmute you. And at that time, please state your name, where you're calling from, and who your question or comment is for. So we'll start with our typed in questions. First question, how do I know how recently an appraisal was done on our church property?
I'll take that, Jermaine. This is Paul. You can give us a call at the service center and we can pull your file and let you know the last date that it was completed. Like I said, we are in the process of completing them all again. The last time they had been done before was 2009, 2010. And like I said, we're about halfway through our new cycle. But you can always give us a call and we can pull the file and let you know that information.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. Does church insurance offer any guidance or documents to minimize risk related to malicious attack? For example, what to do for active shooter?
I'll take that one, Jermaine. It's Paul again. At the current time, we don't have the expertise that local law enforcement would have, so we will typically refer you to local law enforcement. My experience with that has been that they're extremely interested in coming out and meeting with you. They want to understand the lay of the building. This is generally the local police. They can come out and give you some training, shelter in place type of things, but it's a little bit outside of our typical risk management mission and something better handled by local authority expertise.
Wow, thank you. Next question. How big does a claim have to be a serious claim?
Leave that to Joe.
I will take that one, Paul, certainly. The simple answer is depends. There is a certain level of emotion in every single claim, and we want each claim to be a very positive experience. Certainly, we saw the example of that severe claim, but we sometimes receive smaller claims that produce a lot of uncertainty and concern. Someone opens up the church and finds that it has flooded, ends up being a minor water loss, but at first glance it seems very serious. So our claims team is very diligent, very empathetic, really to make sure that there's a good understanding of the claims process. We do a coverage review and analysis in each and every claim. So that's discussed. We want the experience to be very positive. If we need to gather up additional information, if we need to bring out additional experts to provide reassurance, we will do that. Again, our ultimate goal is there's good satisfaction with the settlement and the overall claims process.
All right, thank you. Next question. Property coverage. I hear replacement cost and also appraisal estimates. There can be a huge difference between the two, which is used to determine the final coverage amount.
I'll take that. It's Paul. It's replacement cost. And when we speak about appraisal estimates, we're using an industry software called Marshall Swift. It's a software that is used by the property and casualty industry to determine cost per square foot. It's a very robust program. It takes into account the specifics of your building, your zip code, the era of construction, the type of construction, the configuration. It develops a replacement cost value, which you can boil down to a cost per square foot by section of building. Obviously, a church has a higher cost per square foot than, say, the educational center or wing. That is all determined into a bottom line replacement cost for the building, and that is the value we use on the policy to ensure replacement cost. One thing I didn't mention is a little extra added reassurance is we add an additional 15% available property limit known as a margin clause. In the event of a loss, total loss, say we have an insured building at $1 million, the margin clause says, hey, if we're underinsured, we will pay up to 15% above the $1 million. So it's a little added cost or benefit with no additional cost in the policy.
Thank you. Next question. Is it possible to file a claim for pre-World War II boiler steam valves that are leaking?
I'll take that. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I would. The answer is you can actually file a claim. We're going to investigate it for coverage because I heard the mention of water escaping from a plumbing fixture or heating equipment. So we might have a situation where enough water escapes where damages occur. But if it's a situation where this boiler requires maintenance, valve replacement, again, these policies are designed to protect after sudden and accidental events. So maintenance cannot be part of a claim.
All right, thank you. Next question. How do I determine, oh no, sorry, you answered that one. Somebody had the same question. Next question after that one is hurricane deductible now at 2%?
I'll take that. It's Paul. Yes. Effective June 1st, we wanted to get this done before hurricane season. So effective June 1st, if you have a hurricane deductible on your policy, it is automatically liberalized to 2%. At the renewal, your next renewal, we'll go ahead and price to that. The pricing has been very affordable. This was the result of us listening intently, specifically in Province 4, in a meeting we went to in December. we got to a situation that a lot of folks may not be aware of, but if you're in those areas, you're aware of it, where hurricane deductibles started out at 2%. Folks would say, hey, we haven't heard a hurricane in a long time. Can I raise that to 5% and save some premium? We would say, okay. Next thing you know, we're at 7%. Haven't been a hurricane in a decade, but then the hurricane hit, and 7% of $1 million building is quite a bit to come up with. So a lot of folks were left surprised. A lot of times in the situation, the folks who made the decision 10 years ago weren't the folks that were working with the church today. So what we agreed with the bishops in Province 4 and around the country is that we would lower those to 2%, price it in at renewal. There are two exceptions to this. If you're in the Virgin Islands, the lowest we could go with reinsurance was 5%, same with Hawaii.
All right. Got it. Thanks. Next question. Should we have trained armed parishioners in the church in case of an attack?
I'll take it. This is Paul. We don't make any kind of suggestion one way or the other about that. Again, it's outside of our scope of expertise, something we would refer you to local law enforcement with regard to any kind of situation about whether to arm or not to arm. Again, it becomes an emotional issue. I've seen it both ways in churches, for and against. The policy doesn't speak to it in terms of you can or you can't. So it's really up to each church and the diocese, I would think, as to the approach to be taken.
All right, thank you. Next question. Are visitors to the church covered for injuries during active shooter incident?
Well, I guess this is Paul again, and Joe, you can jump in if you want. The church is covered, okay? So the malicious attack, what happens to trigger a liability claim is someone brings suit. So to the extent that someone's hurt or worse at a church and suit is brought against the church, the malicious attack policy will respond. Our liability policy would respond from a liability perspective. The counseling and the other things we looked at would be the malicious attack. And again, if there was a property situation, the malicious attack would. So I think it's a mix, Joe, would it not be?
I would agree. I think that's a good answer. If they're all of a sudden, if they're presented with a liability claim, we're still going to analyze that and respond appropriately. If a defense is owed, it would be provided.
Yep.
All right, sounds good. Thank you both. Next question. Is the flood max limit of 1 million per church? What about buildings over 1 million?
So this is Paul, and yes, it's a policy limit. So whether you have one building or 10 buildings, the maximum flood limit is $1 million, and it's subject to the hurricane flood deductible, which is 2% everywhere but Hawaii and the Virgin Islands, where it's 5%, as I mentioned. Now, to put it in perspective, flood is excluded from commercial insurance. You won't find flood in your homeowner policy. You won't find it in a competitor's policy. It's something very unique to us. So what we do in the event that a church says, hey, I've got a big exposure to flood, $1 million won't indemnify me completely. What can we do? We can go to the market on your behalf. We can buy excess flood above the $1 million. We can also buy first dollar flood through the government, where you pay a deductible of $50,000. They will actually, through FEMA, provide coverage of up to $500,000 per building. Then we can be $1 million layer after that. And then again, if you wanted to fully ventilate it, you could buy excess flood on top of it. And what I would suggest, anyone that wants to get into the details of that, please reach out to us in our service center. They'll send that call to your regional rep. It's a pretty deep discussion. Obviously, it can get pricey, and I've seen it done both ways. I handle Florida and the Virgin Islands, and I've seen churches where they buy the FEMA but not the excess. I've seen churches where they buy the excess but not the FEMA. but the majority of churches generally just keep the $1 million sub-limit that's in the policy, has been my experience.
Thank you. Next question. Do the majority of churches have package policies? It sounds like malicious attacks coverage is a party is a party of a package policies, but is that what most churches have? Asking from a diocese.
Okay, so that's a great question. 92% of all Episcopal churches in the U.S. are insured through the Church Insurance Company of Vermont denominational plan. So if you are insured with church insurance, you have a package policy. My general answer would be I haven't seen a church that didn't have some form of package coverage. So it's very rare that I don't know that I've ever in my 20 years run into a church that only had liability or only had property. They may buy a policy that wouldn't necessarily make them whole, but it generally is a package policy. But for the majority of us, I'd say, I think last time I looked at it, 92% of all Episcopal churches, they're with church insurance, they have a package policy, they have an umbrella built in, and if they're in the denominational program with us, they automatically get the certificate for malicious attack. It is not technically part of the package. As I mentioned, it's a standalone placement with Lloyd's of London, but we give it to participants free of charge as long as they're in the program.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. If we're making multiple improvements, replacing the shingles on our roofs, replacing an electronic sound system, and expanding restroom facilities, when might we ask for an inspection? Possibly additional improvement of solar panels on the roof, etc. When should we ask CIC to make an inspection?
When the work is complete is really the best time to do it, and we'll come out and take a look with you. If it's simple replacement of existing, so for example, you haven't added anything, you've replaced a roof, or you've replaced a carpet, or you've painted, or you've replaced an HVAC system, not necessary that we're going to have to adjust the policy, although we may. It depends on the deal situation with it, because the policy set up to replace you new for old. So the policy coverage and premiums all are already contemplating you have a new roof. But if it's, for example, you went from an asphalt shingle roof to a slate tile roof, which is a higher value, we would certainly want to come out and get the right value on that. So it's case by case, but there's no bad question. Anytime you're doing any kind of improvement like that, please feel free to give us a call. We can walk you through it.
May I add something real quick?
Yep.
And save all those documents, because say if something does, a loss does occur, we ask questions about the history, because it helps to evaluate and resolve the loss. In addition, sometimes things happen because as a result of things that were not completed correctly, and we can investigate what I described earlier as a subrogation. So all that information is valuable to retain and save, because we may ask if there's any history of work activity as we're investigating a claim.
All right, thank you both. Next question. Is the demolition cost and property cleanup to prepare for a rebuild covered as part of the replacement cost estimate?
This is Paul. It's actually covered under the ordinance and law, debris removal. It's an extension of coverage, so it's not part of replacement cost, because again, replacement cost is just speaking to replacing the building the way it was. Ordinance coverage, debris removal is an extension of coverage built into every policy we write, so you do have that coverage.
Got it, and thanks. Next question. Tell me more about steam boiler inspection coverage.
Okay, this is Paul. So again, if you are insured in the denominational program through the Church Insurance Company of Vermont, you automatically have equipment breakdown coverage built into your coverage portfolio. With regard to inspections, generally it's around steam boilers, but I've also seen them reach out with regard to electrical surge type things. And it's something that travelers will come out and do the inspection for you. So again, if you have interest in that, or if you haven't heard from somebody and you have a boiler and it's been a year or two since you heard from travelers, please reach out to us and we will connect you with the appropriate folks.
All right. Next, during a named hurricane, does flood insurance apply?
This is Paul. Yes.
I'll add something from the claim side and we will actually separate out damage by wind and damage by flood.
Perfect. Thank you both. Next question. Are stained glass windows insured to repair cracks or holes? A cost estimate at our church to do the repairs is $6,000.
It would depend. This is Paul. That would depend on the cause of loss. So if it's just maintenance, settling, things like that, that's not going to be something that is covered by insurance. If it's a loss due to the fact that someone threw a brick through it, or heat, or some sort of cause of loss that we can determine that's covered by the policy, then we would have you submit that as a claim. Joe, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a good response, because that question does come up a lot. It's a very good question. From the claim side, we really need to know when and how it happened. That's some of the questions that we will ask.
That's right.
All right, thank you. Next question. Is it possible for us to get CPG to reevaluate property replacement costs with the STD tool? Ours appears grossly underinsured.
Yes, and again, that's something we're in the process of doing system-wide. So if you want to reach out to the service center and connect you to your VP, if it's an appraisal that has been done in the last year or so, and you have concerns whether the appraisals are appropriate, that's something that the VP could sit down with you and go through case by case, church by church. If it's something that, if you haven't been completed yet, the VP can let you know when you're slated to be completed, and in a lot of cases, they can pull you out of the queue and do the appraisal for you right away. We are following a systematic approach, but we do have flexibility for anything that's urgent or one-offs that require specific immediate attention.
Thank you. Next
Hey, Jermaine.
question. Yes?
Jermaine, this is Bob. We had an earlier question about the call center phone number, and that keeps coming up.
Sure.
Paul or Sam, do you have the number? And I will send it out to everyone through the
got it.
chat function.
So I tell folks that at the end of the day, if you're insured with us, what you need to know about insurance is this: 800-293-3525. We're set up to be turnkey. We're set up to free ministers to minister. Focus on property and casualty while you focus on the good work of the church.
Thanks, Paul. And everyone, I sent that out to you through the chat function. So look in your GoToWebinar control panel under chat, and you should find that number. Thanks, Jermaine.
Thank you, Bob. All right, we still have questions. So our next question: does tree removal expense due to a hurricane have coverage?
I can answer that. The bottom line is, if the tree damages covered property, then there is coverage to remove the tree. So, for example, the tree falls on the building, so it's hit the covered property. There would be coverage. If the tree falls in the woods and doesn't hit any covered property, that's an exclusion under any policy. It's uninsurable. There's not a rate that could be charged that would insure every tree standing today. So it's limited to it hitting damaging property. And it could be a fence, a shed, the building itself. But if it just falls in the yard, there's no coverage for that. And I'm not aware of any policy form in the industry that would cover that.
Got it, and thank you. Next question. Can we schedule items under the boiler portion of the policy, or is it automatically extended from scheduled property?
We would need to just drill down into what those items are. So again, I would reach out through the service center, have a dialogue with your regional representative, and they can take you through that.
All right, thank you. This is the last question so far, unless someone goes in and types another.
Okay.
This question is, what if the tree falls in the cemetery and damages headstones?
I do believe there would be coverage for that. It's hitting covered property. We do have some limited cemetery building coverage, headstone coverage. Joe, do you want to add or correct me on that?
You're right on there, Paul.
Okay.
What we do too, anytime we have a claim, especially involving trees, we'll ask a lot of questions. We'll get a good analysis of what's going on, and we will work hard to find coverage when we can. In any situation where we cannot, where coverage doesn't apply, an item cannot be part of a claim, we have to follow up with appropriate correspondence so you have a full understanding of why there's an exclusion of coverage or limitation.
Good.
Okay. So we are at 4:05 approximately. We do have another question.
All right.
Trees on our property were damaged due to a leaking gas line and eventually died. Is a claim possible?
So I can answer that, or Joe, you can answer it. Trees are excluded again. Now you may have your own subrogation opportunity with whoever's responsible for that. But as far as the commercial package policy goes, trees are excluded unless they damage covered property.
That's the correct answer, Paul. That's the answer I would have provided.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But if it was caused by the gas company, it's probably worth, if you've got an attorney in the church, it's probably worth them writing a little letter to see what they could shake loose.
All right, thank you. Those are all the questions we have for now. We are now at still about 4:06. So just want to remind everyone, if you want to ask a live question, the vertical bar to the left of your GoToWebinar control panel, you should see an icon that looks like a hand. This is the raise hand icon. By clicking this icon, we can see that you have raised your hand. Then I will unmute you, ask you to go ahead with your question or comment. Please say your name and what institution you represent if your question or comment is for a specific person. I see no hands, and I think everyone knows how to type in a question. Oh, we do have one hand. Oh, no, we don't. All right, so in the sense of time, for those of you who are attending a webinar for the first time this year, we have a bit different way of getting your feedback. Rather than a poll during the webinar, we are requesting your feedback in a 4-question scaled survey, plus one additional comments box. When this webinar ends, a screen will pop up asking you to complete the survey. We truly do take into account your feedback. Thank you in advance for completing the survey.
And Jermaine, can I add something?
Sure.
We hope that everybody comes back to class next month in June. We will be tackling the giant concept of liability, including sexual misconduct, liability risk management, and we will also have Joe or one of his colleagues come back with a liability case study. So I don't think you'll want to miss that, and we look forward to seeing you in June.
All right. So thank you, presenters, for your participation and information. Thank you to the members of the webinar for giving us some of your time and your busy schedules. Don't forget to please check the webinar page in the Administrators Resource Center, ARC, and that's at cpg.org/webinar. @ARC for information and registration links for upcoming webinars. Once again, please give us your feedback on the survey.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
so
much.
much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.